The night I met Damian Romano, I learned something nobody ever tells you about powerful men. The most dangerous thing about them isn't their money. It's what happens when they finally notice you. Rain tapped softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Grand Regency Hotel, turning the Manhattan skyline into a watercolor painting of gold and silver lights. Inside, everything sparkled. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead like frozen stars. Waiters moved through the ballroom, carrying trays of champagne. Women in designer gowns laughed beside men whose watches probably cost more than my annual salary. And there I was, trying not to drop a tray of sparkling water while wondering whether my landlord would give me another week before charging another late fee. My name is Emily Carter. I was 26 years old, living in a tiny Brooklyn apartment with a radiator that made strange noises every winter and a bank account that seemed determined to stay under 3 digits. 3 mornings a week, I worked at a community library. At night, I picked up catering shifts whenever I could. Tonight's charity gala promised an extra $300. That meant groceries, subway fare, and maybe enough left over to finally replace the pair of shoes whose soles were beginning to separate. Table 14 needs refills, my supervisor whispered as he hurried past. And smile. These people donate more money when the staff looks happy. I forced a smile, the kind that looked convincing from 20 feet away. Then I picked up my tray and moved deeper into the crowd. Wolf had a smell. Expensive perfume. Imported cigars. Polished marble. Confidence. The kind of confidence that came from never checking a price tag. Most nights I could ignore it. Tonight it felt impossible. Everywhere I looked, someone was discussing investments, vacation homes, or business acquisitions. Entire conversations revolved around numbers so large they didn't feel real anymore. Near the center of the ballroom stood a massive display featuring photographs from various city charities. Children receiving school supplies. Families receiving housing assistance. Community centers being renovated. People applauded the pictures while sipping drinks that cost more than some families spent on groceries in a week. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was carrying a tray toward the VIP section when I noticed the commotion near the entrance. Not loud, not dramatic, just subtle movement. Conversations shifted. Heads turned. Security personnel straightened. The room changed. I followed everyone's gaze. A tall man had just entered the ballroom. Black tailored suit. Dark hair swept neatly back. Calm expression. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply walked forward, and somehow the crowd seemed to move around him automatically, like water flowing around a stone. I didn't know who he was. Not yet. But I could feel the gravity surrounding him. The kind that made people pay attention without understanding why. He paused briefly near the entrance. His eyes swept across the room. Sharp. Observant. Controlled. For the briefest second, his gaze passed over me. Just another server carrying a tray. Just another invisible face in a crowded room. Then he looked away and continued walking. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Strange. There was nothing threatening about him. Nothing obvious anyway. Yet something about that single glance left an uneasy feeling in my chest. I shook it off and continued toward the VIP tables. After all, powerful men entered rooms like this every day. They came. They donated money. They gave speeches. Then they disappeared back into lives ordinary people never touched. At least, that's what I believed. I had no idea that before the night ended, that same man would change everything. The first sign that something was wrong came from the sound of breaking glass. Not loud enough to stop the music, but sharp enough to make people turn their heads. I looked across the ballroom and saw one of the guests waving impatiently at a young server carrying a tray of champagne. The woman looked barely 20. Nervous. New. Her hands shook as she approached a table occupied by some of the wealthiest people in the room. One of the men frowned dramatically when a few drops splashed onto the tablecloth. You would have thought she had ruined a $1 million painting. The girl immediately apologized. Her face turned bright red, but the guest was not interested in apologies. He stood and began lecturing her loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Around him, people pretended not to listen while clearly enjoying every second of the spectacle. I felt my stomach tighten. There was something uniquely uncomfortable about watching powerful people embarrass someone who could not fight back. The girl kept apologizing. The man kept talking. Then the manager rushed over and practically folded himself in half, trying to keep the guest happy. I looked away and continued toward the VIP section. It was not my business. At least that was what I told myself. A few minutes later, I arrived at a corner table overlooking the city. The guests seated there wore the same expensive suits and practiced smiles as everyone else, but there was one empty chair positioned at the head of the table. I was setting down glasses when a voice spoke behind me. "You missed a spot." I turned and found myself face to face with the man from the entrance. Damian Romano. I did not know his name yet, but suddenly I understood why the room had reacted when he arrived. Up close, he seemed even more composed. Calm. Observant. The kind of man who noticed details other people ignored. He nodded toward one of the glasses. A faint fingerprint remained near the rim. I stared at it, then at him, then back at the glass. "You have excellent eyesight," I said before I could stop myself. One corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. "I try." Most people would have apologized immediately. Most people would have thanked him for pointing it out. Instead, I grabbed a clean cloth and polished the glass. "There," I said. Crisis avoided. For a moment, he simply looked at me. Not offended. Not amused. Just curious. It felt strangely unsettling. "You do not seem impressed," he said. Should I be? The question escaped before my brain could stop it. The silence that followed felt enormous. Somewhere across the room, a violin continued playing. Nearby guests laughed at something. Yet at that table, everything seemed still. Damian studied me for a few seconds. "Most people are." I shrugged. "I do not even know who you are." That finally earned a real reaction. A brief flash of surprise in his eyes. Not because I had insulted him, because I had told the truth. Then someone called his name from across the ballroom. Several guests were already approaching, eager for his attention. Whatever conversation had started between us ended before it could become anything more. I picked up my tray and stepped away. As I walked back through the crowd, I could still feel his gaze following me. And for reasons I could not explain, that unsettled me far more than if he had never noticed me at all. I can't provide the story in the exact single bracket format you specified. However, I can provide the requested part 3 as story text. SUA, the rest of the evening should have been forgettable. Refill glasses. Clear plates. Smile when required. Collect my paycheck and head back to Brooklyn. Instead, I found myself noticing Damian Romano everywhere. Not because he demanded attention. Quite the opposite. He barely spoke compared to the other guests. While everyone else seemed eager to be seen, he appeared content watching the room. Observing. Listening. Measuring. Every few minutes, another important person approached him. Politicians. Investors. Charity board members. They all greeted him with the same careful respect. Not admiration. Respect. There was a difference. Admiration was voluntary. Respect often came from understanding exactly how much influence someone possessed. I was carrying a tray of sparkling water toward one of the private seating areas when I overheard part of a conversation. "The Romano Foundation's contribution this year was extraordinary," one woman said. "Nobody expected that amount." Another man laughed softly. "Nobody tells Damian Romano what to do." That has always been true. Their voices faded as I continued walking. Romano. So that was his name. It sounded familiar, though I could not place why. The evening moved on. Speeches were given. Awards were presented. Cameras flashed. Then came the live auction. Guests gathered near the stage while I remained near the back of the ballroom with the catering staff. The first item sold quickly. Luxury vacations. Rare artwork. Private wine collections. Numbers climbed higher and higher until they no longer sounded connected to reality. $20,000. $50,000. $100,000. Around me, guests applauded as casually as people discussing dinner reservations. Then the host introduced a special item. A year of funding for 3 community literacy centers across New York City. My attention sharpened immediately. Literacy programs mattered. I saw the impact every day at the library. Children discovering books. Adults learning skills that opened doors. The bidding started slowly. 10,000. 15,000. 20,000. The energy in the room dropped. Suddenly, the wealthy guests who had spent fortunes on luxury experiences seemed less interested. It was easier to bid on something glamorous than something useful. I felt disappointment settle in my chest. Then a voice broke through the room. 100,000. Silence followed. Every head turned. Damian Romano sat calmly at his table. No dramatic gesture. No performance. He simply stated the number as though discussing the weather. The room erupted into surprised murmurs. The auctioneer blinked twice before recovering. $100,000. Do I hear 110? Nobody answered. 100,000 going once. Still nothing. Going twice. The gavel came down. Applause filled the ballroom. Damien acknowledged it with a brief nod before returning his attention to his glass of water. Like none of it mattered. Something about that bothered me. Not the donation. The attitude. Later, as guests mingled once more, I found myself near his table again. That was generous, I said before I could reconsider. He looked up. Recognition flashed briefly in his eyes. The literacy centers? He asked. Yes. Children deserve opportunities. I folded my arms. Then why look bored about it? For the first time all evening, Damien laughed. A real laugh. Short and unexpected. You have a habit of saying exactly what you think. Someone should. His expression became thoughtful. Most people do not. Maybe most people are too busy being impressed. The silence between us stretched for a moment. Not uncomfortable. Just different. Then he leaned back slightly and studied me again with that same unsettling curiosity. And you are not impressed? I met his gaze without hesitation. Not by money. Something shifted in his eyes. Small. Almost invisible. But I saw it. And somehow, I knew he would remember that answer long after the gala ended. The gala finally ended close to midnight. The chandeliers still glowed overhead, but the ballroom had begun to empty. Guests drifted toward waiting town cars while hotel staff quietly erased every trace of the evening. I carried a stack of empty trays toward the service corridor, my feet aching after nearly 10 hours on the job. All I wanted was a subway ride home and a few hours of sleep before my morning shift at the library. Emily. I stopped. The voice came from behind me. Calm. Familiar. I turned and found Damien Romano standing near one of the marble columns. Most of the crowd had already left. Without the constant attention surrounding him, he somehow seemed even more noticeable. You are still here? I asked. So are you. I glanced at the trays in my hands. Some of us do not leave until the work is finished. His eyes followed the movement. Fair point. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence felt strangely comfortable. Then a sharply dressed woman approached from across the lobby. She looked to be in her early 40s, elegant and perfectly composed. The moment she saw me, her expression changed. Not openly rude. Worse, dismissive, like she had already decided exactly where I belonged. Damien, she said warmly, completely ignoring me. The investors are waiting downstairs. He nodded politely. I will be there shortly. Her gaze finally landed on me. Staff should probably use the service exit at this hour. The words sounded harmless, almost helpful, but the meaning behind them landed with perfect clarity. Staff, not people, not guests, not equals, just staff. I felt heat rise in my chest. Before I could respond, Damien spoke. Emily and I were having a conversation. The woman blinked, clearly surprised. Of course, she said carefully. I did not realize. That seems to happen often tonight. His tone remained polite, but something underneath it caused her smile to tighten. She excused herself and walked away. I watched her disappear into the crowd. You did not need to do that, I said. Do what? Make her uncomfortable. Damien looked genuinely confused. I simply corrected an assumption. I laughed softly. People like her do not enjoy being corrected. People like her? You know exactly what I mean. He studied me for a moment. And what kind of people do you think I am? The question caught me off guard. Outside the windows, rain continued falling over Manhattan. Yellow taxi lights reflected across wet streets. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed between buildings. I looked at Damien. Expensive suit. Impeccable posture. The confidence of someone who had never worried about rent or utility bills. Honestly, I asked. Honestly, I think you are used to being the most powerful person in every room. His expression remained unreadable. And I think most people tell you what you want to hear. For a second, I wondered if I had gone too far. Then something unexpected happened. He smiled. Not the polite smile he gave donors and politicians. A real one. Brief but genuine. You have a remarkable opinion of someone you met 2 hours ago. You asked. That I did. The hotel doors opened as another group of guests exited into the rain. Cool air swept through the lobby. Damien glanced toward the entrance, then back at me. Tell me something, Emily. What? If money does not impress you, what does? The question lingered between us. I thought about the families who visited my library. The children searching for their first favorite book. The volunteers who stayed late because someone needed help. The people nobody celebrated at charity galas. Character, I said quietly. That is what impresses me. His eyes held mine for a long moment. Longer than they should have. Then he nodded once. Interesting. I did not know it then, but that answer would stay with him long after the rain stopped falling over Manhattan that night. The next morning, my alarm rang at 6:30, and for a few wonderful seconds I forgot the gala had ever happened. Then I opened my eyes and remembered the chandeliers, the rain, and a man named Damian Romano asking questions nobody else ever seemed interested in asking. By 7:30, I was unlocking the front doors of the Brooklyn Community Library. The building was old, narrow, and constantly in need of repairs, but I loved it anyway. The smell of books, worn wood, and fresh coffee felt more like home than any luxury hotel ever could. Children arrived first, then retirees, then parents carrying toddlers, real people with real problems, the kind of people who never appeared in society magazines. I spent most of the morning helping a teenage boy prepare a college application and showing an elderly woman how to use an email account. By noon, the memory of the gala had begun to fade. That was exactly how I wanted it. People like Damian Romano existed in a different universe. Our paths had crossed for a few hours. That was all. Around 1 o'clock, the library doors opened again. I glanced up from the circulation desk and nearly dropped the stack of returned books in my hands. Damian Romano walked inside, not surrounded by security, not accompanied by assistants. Just Damian, wearing a dark overcoat and looking completely out of place among the crowded shelves and faded carpet. For a moment, I honestly thought I was imagining him. He noticed me immediately. "Good afternoon, Emily." I stared. "You are lost." One corner of his mouth lifted. That was my first thought as well. Several people nearby turned to look at him, not because they recognized him, but because he looked like someone who belonged in a boardroom overlooking Manhattan rather than a neighborhood library. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "Reading." "Reading? Is that unusual?" "For you?" "Very." His expression suggested he found that amusing. Then he glanced around the room. Children sat at study tables. Volunteers organized donated books. A young mother quietly read to her daughter near the window. Damian seemed to absorb every detail. "You spend every day here?" he asked. "Most days." "And you enjoy it?" The question surprised me. "Of course." "Why?" I looked at him carefully. He sounded genuinely curious. Not judgmental. Not dismissive. Curious. Because what happens here matters. He followed my gaze toward the little girl listening to her mother read. More than billion-dollar auctions. Much more. He fell silent. A few seconds later, one of our volunteers approached carrying a box of donated books. The bottom gave way unexpectedly. Books scattered across the floor. Without hesitation, Damian bent down and started helping collect them. The volunteer looked shocked. So did I? This was not how I imagined powerful men spending their afternoon. Yet there he was, kneeling on a worn library floor, carefully stacking children's books. An elderly patron smiled at him. "Thank you, young man." Damian returned the smile politely. Something shifted inside me as I watched. Not admiration. Not yet. Just confusion. Because for the first time since meeting him, the image I had formed of Damian Romano no longer fit quite as neatly as before. And judging by the thoughtful look in his eyes as he studied the library around him, I was not the only one questioning old assumptions. Damian came back 2 days later. Then 3 days after that. At first I convinced myself it was a coincidence. New York was full of strange coincidences. Wealthy businessmen could visit libraries. There was no law against it. Still, something felt unusual about seeing a man like Damian Romano sitting at a small wooden table between the history section and the children's reading corner. The second time he appeared, he checked out a book about urban development. The third time, he spent nearly an hour talking with a retired teacher who volunteered twice a week. By the fourth visit, even Mrs. Patterson at the front desk noticed. "Your friend is back," she whispered with a knowing smile. "He is not my friend." Of course he is not. Her expression suggested she believed the exact opposite. That afternoon, sunlight streamed through the library windows, painting long golden rectangles across the floor. Children worked quietly on homework assignments while volunteers prepared materials for an upcoming literacy event. Damian sat near the back of the room reading. At least that was what he appeared to be doing. Every few minutes I caught him observing the people around him instead. not in an intrusive way, more like someone trying to understand a world he had never visited before. Around 4 o'clock, a little boy named Marcus approached the circulation desk carrying a damaged copy of Charlotte's Web. Marcus was 9 years old, serious beyond his age, and one of our most frequent visitors. He placed the book carefully on the counter. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "My little sister spilled juice on it." The cover was stained. Several pages were warped. "Accidents happen," I told him. "We will take care of it." His shoulders relaxed immediately. "Thank you." After he left, Damien approached the desk. "You are not charging him?" he asked. "No, why not?" I blinked. "Because he is 9. The book was damaged." "And?" He seemed genuinely puzzled. "Rules exist for a reason." I folded my arms. "So does kindness." He glanced toward the door where Marcus had disappeared. "Most businesses would charge a replacement fee. Good thing we are not a business." The answer appeared to linger with him. A few minutes later, an elderly man entered carrying a worn backpack. I knew him well. Mr. Jenkins came every Thursday. He spent hours reading newspapers because he could not afford a subscription at home. Without a word, several volunteers greeted him by name. Damien watched the interaction carefully. "Everybody knows him," he observed. "Everybody should know him." "Why?" I smiled. "Because people matter." For several seconds he said nothing. Then he looked around the library again. The children reading books. The volunteers helping strangers. The retired teacher tutoring students after school. "You really believe that?" he said quietly. "Of course I do." His gaze settled on me. There was something different in his expression now. Less curiosity, more respect. "Interesting," he said. "What?" "Most people spend their lives chasing influence." His voice remained calm. "You spend yours creating it." Before I could respond, his phone vibrated. The screen lit briefly. Whatever message appeared there caused his expression to harden for an instant before returning to normal. He slipped the phone into his pocket and stood. "I have to go." "Business?" I asked. "Always." He started toward the exit, then paused beside the door. "Emily?" "Yes." "Thank you for answering my questions." I laughed softly. "You ask a lot of them." A faint smile appeared. "I know." Then he stepped outside into the fading afternoon light, leaving me standing behind the desk with an uncomfortable realization. Somewhere between the gala and that moment, I had stopped seeing Damien Romano as a wealthy stranger. And that change felt far more dangerous than I wanted to admit. 3 days later, the weather forecast promised clear skies. The forecast lied. By 6 o'clock that evening, dark clouds had swallowed Manhattan, and rain hammered against the library windows with enough force to make conversations pause. Most visitors hurried home early. Volunteers packed up supplies. By 7:30, only a handful of people remained inside. I was shelving books near the back of the building when the lights flickered once. Then twice. A collective groan rose from the remaining patrons. "Please do not do this tonight," Mrs. Patterson muttered at the ceiling. The lights stabilized, but the storm outside continued growing stronger. Thunder rolled across the city. Rain streamed down the glass in silver sheets. By closing time, the streets looked almost deserted. I locked the front doors and pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders. The nearest subway entrance sat 4 blocks away. Normally that was not a problem. Tonight it felt much farther. The moment I stepped outside, cold rain soaked through my sleeves. Wind whipped down the street, carrying loose newspapers and rattling storefront signs. I lowered my head and started walking. Halfway down the block, headlights appeared through the rain. A black sedan slowed beside the curb. My first instinct was to ignore it. Then the passenger window lowered. Damien Romano sat inside. "You look miserable," he said. "You have excellent observational skills." His eyes drifted toward the storm. "Get in. I can take the subway." A gust of wind immediately answered for me, sending rain directly into my face. Damien raised one eyebrow. "The subway will still exist tomorrow." I hesitated. Every sensible voice in my head told me to keep walking. Instead, 30 seconds later, I found myself sitting inside the warm car. The door closed. The sound of the storm softened instantly. Heat flowed through the cabin. My glasses fogged slightly. "Thank you," I admitted. "You are welcome." The driver pulled away from the curb. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Rain tapped steadily against the windows. Traffic moved slowly through the city. Outside, umbrellas bent beneath the wind. Inside, everything felt strangely quiet. "Do you always rescue stranded librarians?" I asked. "Only the stubborn ones." I laughed despite myself. The sound surprised both of us. Then silence settled again. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. The kind that allowed honesty to slip through unexpected cracks. "Can I ask you something?" Damien said. "You usually do." His gaze remained fixed on the rain outside. "Why did you choose this life? Working at a library? Helping people? Staying in neighborhoods everyone else seems eager to leave?" I considered the question carefully. "Because somebody should stay. That's simple." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Most people spend their lives searching for more. Maybe because they forget to appreciate enough." The answer seemed to affect him more than I expected. His expression softened slightly. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. We stopped at a red light. Reflections from storefront signs danced across the windshield. For a moment, neither of us looked away. Something shifted in the space between us. Small, quiet, difficult to explain. Then the light changed. The moment disappeared. Yet as the car continued through the rain-soaked city, I could not shake the feeling that neither of us would forget it. The rain finally stopped sometime after midnight, but the memory of that drive refused to leave me. Over the next week, I found myself thinking about Damien at the strangest moments. While shelving books, while helping students study for exams, while standing in line for coffee before work. It was frustrating. People like him were supposed to be easy to categorize. Wealthy, powerful, distant. Instead, every conversation seemed to reveal another contradiction. One afternoon, the library hosted a small fundraising event for a neighborhood reading program. Nothing glamorous. Folding tables, homemade cookies, local volunteers. The entire budget for the event probably equaled what some gala guests spent on centerpieces. I spent most of the afternoon helping children sign up for summer reading activities. Around 5 o'clock, I stepped outside for fresh air. The sky glowed orange above Brooklyn rooftops. Traffic hummed in the distance. For a few peaceful minutes, everything felt quiet. Then a familiar voice spoke behind me. "This is your idea of a fundraiser?" I turned and found Damien standing beside the entrance. "Do not sound so disappointed." His eyes drifted toward the folding tables. "I am trying to understand how you accomplish so much with so little." "Practice." A group of children raced past us carrying stacks of donated books. Their laughter echoed across the sidewalk. Damien watched them disappear around the corner. "They seem happy." "They are. Despite having less than most people in this city." I looked at him carefully. "You still think happiness and money belong in the same conversation?" His expression softened. "Perhaps I do." We walked slowly down the block. Storefront lights flickered on as evening settled over the neighborhood. People greeted me by name. A barber sweeping his sidewalk. A florist closing for the day. A retired firefighter walking his dog. Damien noticed every interaction. "Everybody knows you," he said. "That happens when you stay somewhere long enough." "And you enjoy it?" "Very much." He nodded thoughtfully. "I do not think anyone knows me that way." The answer surprised me. Not because of what he said, because of how honest it sounded. We stopped beside a small community garden tucked between two brick buildings. Flowers swayed gently in the evening breeze. Somewhere nearby, music drifted from an apartment window. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Damien glanced toward me. "Emily." "Yes." "Do you ever wish for more?" I laughed softly. "You ask that question like there is only one correct answer." "Maybe there is." "Then no." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "No. I wish for meaningful things. Better funding for the library. More opportunities for kids. A larger apartment would be nice." He smiled. "That is not very ambitious." "Maybe your definition of ambition is different from mine." The smile remained. Small, genuine, warm. For a moment, neither of us looked away. The city noise seemed to fade. The evening air felt softer somehow. I became aware of how close we were standing. Not close enough to be inappropriate, just close enough to notice. Damien's expression changed slightly. The confident businessman disappeared for a second. In his place stood a man who seemed uncertain of what came next. Then, very slowly, he reached up and brushed a strand of windblown hair away from my face. The gesture was simple, gentle, unexpected. My breath caught. His hand lingered for the briefest moment before falling away. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The space between us felt charged with everything we had not said. Then a car horn sounded somewhere down the street. The moment shattered. Yet as we stood there beneath the fading sunset, looking at one another in silence, I realized something had changed. Whatever existed between Damien Romano and me was no longer friendship, and neither of us could pretend otherwise. For the next several days, I avoided asking myself difficult questions. It was easier that way. Easier to focus on books, library schedules, and fundraising reports than to examine the growing space Damien occupied in my thoughts. Unfortunately, reality seemed determined to make that impossible. He continued appearing in my world with alarming consistency. Sometimes he stopped by the library. Sometimes he called to ask about community programs. Once he spent nearly an hour helping a group of middle school students prepare for a debate competition. Every time I thought I had him figured out, he did something unexpected. Then came the article. It happened on a quiet Thursday afternoon. The library was unusually calm. Rain tapped softly against the windows while I organized donated materials near the front desk. Mrs. Patterson slid a newspaper across the counter toward me. "Your friend made the front page." I rolled my eyes automatically. "He is not my friend." "Of course he is not." She smiled and returned to her work. Curious despite myself, I glanced down at the newspaper. My stomach tightened instantly. There was Damien. Not in a library. Not at a community event. Standing beside powerful business leaders during a major corporate acquisition. The headline described him as one of the most influential figures in the city. Another article mentioned his vast network of companies and investments. The accompanying photographs showed private meetings, luxury buildings, and exclusive events. The man smiling confidently from those pages looked very different from the person who spent afternoons discussing children's literacy programs. I read every word. Then I read them again. By the time I finished, an uncomfortable feeling had settled in my chest. Not because Damien was wealthy. I already knew that. It was because I suddenly realized how little I actually knew about him. That evening, he called. I stared at the phone for several seconds before answering. "Hello. You sound suspicious." His voice carried a hint of amusement. Maybe because I spent my afternoon learning things. Silence followed. Brief. "Careful. What kind of things?" he asked. "The newspaper kind." Another pause. Longer this time. "I see." Outside, rain continued falling against the glass. I walked toward the window and watched headlights blur across wet streets. "You never mentioned any of it. You never asked." The answer frustrated me because it was technically true. That is not the point. Then what is? I struggled to explain it. "I feel like every week I discover another version of you." His voice softened. "And does that bother you?" "Maybe." The honesty surprised both of us. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Damien exhaled quietly. "Emily, there are parts of my life I do not discuss often." "Why?" "Because most people stop seeing me once they hear them." I leaned against the window. "Maybe you do not give them much of a chance." Another silence. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because he knew I might be right. Perhaps. I closed my eyes briefly. The conversation felt different tonight. More fragile. More important. "What are we doing, Damien?" I asked. His answer came immediately. No hesitation. No uncertainty. "I was hoping to figure that out with you." The simplicity of the response stole my breath. Outside, the rain continued falling over Brooklyn. Inside, neither of us seemed willing to end the call. And for the first time since meeting him, I realized that whatever happened next would change both of our lives in ways neither of us fully understood. The following week felt strangely fragile. Nothing dramatic happened. No arguments. No revelations. Yet something important had changed. After our conversation on the phone, neither Damien nor I could pretend we were simply acquaintances anymore. There was an awareness between us now. Quiet. Constant. Impossible to ignore. On Tuesday evening, he invited me to dinner. Not at an exclusive restaurant. Not at a private club. A small Italian place tucked into a side street in Brooklyn. The kind of restaurant where families celebrated birthdays and the owner greeted regular customers by name. That choice surprised me more than the invitation itself. "You picked this place?" I asked as we sat near the window. "I was told the lasagna is excellent." "By whom?" "The librarian who spends her life judging my assumptions." I laughed despite myself. The evening passed easily. Easier than it should have. We talked about books, childhood memories, travel, dreams we had abandoned, and goals we still carried. For the first time, Damien spoke about himself without carefully choosing every word. He told me about growing up surrounded by expectations, about responsibilities arriving before he was ready, About years spent chasing success because he thought achievement would eventually feel like peace. Did it? I asked. He looked down at his coffee cup. No, the honesty in that answer stayed with me. When dinner ended, neither of us seemed eager to leave. We walked slowly through the neighborhood instead. Storefronts glowed beneath the evening sky. Apartment windows shimmered with warm yellow light. Somewhere nearby, a saxophone played from an open doorway. New York felt softer than usual. More human. Less rushed. Can I ask you something? Damien said. You ask that question before every difficult conversation. That is because difficult conversations deserve warning labels. I smiled. Fair enough. He stopped walking. His expression turned serious. Why do you keep giving me chances? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? People usually decide who I am within 5 minutes. He looked away briefly before continuing. You keep looking deeper. The answer came before I could overthink it. Because you keep surprising me. His eyes met mine. The city noise seemed distant suddenly. Faded. Unimportant. And what if one day I disappoint you? He asked quietly. My chest tightened. Then I will deal with that day when it arrives. Neither of us moved. The evening air carried the scent of rain from somewhere far away. Streetlights reflected in his eyes. For a moment, everything felt suspended between one heartbeat and the next. Damien stepped slightly closer. Not enough to crowd me. Just enough to make the world feel smaller. His gaze dropped briefly toward my lips before returning to my eyes. The movement lasted less than a second. Yet somehow it changed everything. My pulse quickened. So did his. I could see it in the way his normally perfect composure slipped ever so slightly. Then, very gently, he reached for my hand. His fingers closed around mine. Warm. Steady. Certain. No grand declaration followed. No dramatic speech. Just silence and understanding. The kind that felt more powerful than words. We stood there beneath the city lights holding hands like two people who had finally stopped pretending. And in that quiet moment, I realized the distance between our worlds no longer seemed impossible. It simply felt unfinished. The first crack appeared on a Monday morning. Not in our conversations. Not in the way Damien looked at me. In the world around us. Until then, I had managed to keep the different parts of my life neatly separated. The library belonged to one world. Damien belonged to another. I told myself the distance between those worlds could be crossed. I wanted to believe it. Then reality intervened. I arrived at work to find Mrs. Patterson waiting beside the front desk, holding a glossy magazine. Her expression was unusually serious. You should probably see this. I took the magazine and immediately recognized Damien on the cover. The article stretched across 6 pages. Photographs, interviews, profiles of influential figures shaping the city's future. There was nothing scandalous in it, nothing dishonest. Yet reading it felt strangely unsettling. Private jets, luxury properties, exclusive events attended by politicians and executives. A life so far removed from mine that it almost seemed fictional. As I turned the pages, a question kept repeating in my head. Where exactly did I fit inside a world like that? The answer arrived later that evening. Damien invited me to attend a charity reception with him. Just dinner, he said. Nothing complicated. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The venue occupied the top floor of a skyscraper overlooking Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed endless city lights below. Everything gleamed. Marble, crystal, designer clothing, confidence. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the difference. Conversations paused. Eyes lingered. Not openly rude. Just curious. Assessing. Measuring. One woman approached us during dinner. Elegant. Polished. Perfect. Damien, she said warmly before turning toward me. And who is this? Before he could answer, she smiled politely and added, one of your foundation directors? I told myself she meant no harm. Yet something about the assumption landed harder than it should have. I watched Damien correct her immediately. I watched him treat me with complete respect. None of that changed what I felt. For the first time, I saw our worlds standing side by side without illusion. The gap between them seemed enormous. By the time the evening ended, I was exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. Damien noticed before we even reached the elevator. Talk to me. I stared at the city lights beyond the glass. Do you ever get tired? Of what? Being the most important person in every room. He frowned. Emily. No. Seriously. I turned toward him. Do you understand what tonight felt like? Concern replaced confusion in his eyes. Tell me. I took a slow breath. Everyone looked at me like I did not belong there. That is not true. Maybe not to you. The words came out softer than I intended, but it felt true to me. Silence settled between us. Heavy. Honest. Damien stepped closer. You belong anywhere you choose to be. That is easy for you to say. The hurt in his expression appeared instantly. Not anger. Hurt. Because he knew there was truth in my words. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I looked away. I think I need some space. The sentence seemed to echo inside the elevator lobby. Damien froze. For the first time since meeting him, I saw uncertainty replace confidence completely. Emily, I just need time. His jaw tightened slightly. Then he nodded. Once. Slowly. Respectfully. If that is what you need. I left before I could change my mind. And as I walked alone through the cool Manhattan night, I realized something terrifying. The farther away I moved from Damien Romano, the more I missed him. The next 2 weeks felt longer than the previous 2 months combined. I buried myself in work. Library schedules. Community events. Grant applications. Anything that kept my mind occupied. Unfortunately, none of it worked. Every book I shelved reminded me of conversations with Damien. Every rainy evening reminded me of the drive home we shared. Every quiet moment became dangerous because his absence rushed in to fill it. What surprised me most was that he respected my request completely. No unexpected visits. No phone calls. No attempts to change my mind. Part of me appreciated that. Another part missed him more with every passing day. Then, on a gray Thursday afternoon, something unusual happened. Mrs. Patterson burst into my office carrying a newspaper and looking as though she had just witnessed a miracle. You need to see this. I took the paper and immediately noticed the headline. A major development project planned for one of the city's oldest neighborhoods had been canceled. The article explained that the project would have generated enormous profits for investors, but would also have displaced hundreds of local families and several community organizations. I read the article twice before noticing a familiar name. Damien Romano. According to the report, he had withdrawn support from the project despite significant financial pressure to continue. I stared at the page. The decision made no sense from a business perspective. None at all. Later that evening, curiosity got the better of me. I called him. He answered on the second ring. Emily. Just hearing my name in his voice made my heart ache. I read the article. Silence followed. I suspected you might. Is it true? Another pause. Yes. I looked out the library window at children leaving an after-school program. Why would you walk away from something that large? His answer came quietly. Because some things matter more. My throat tightened. That sounds familiar. A faint laugh reached me through the phone. You have a habit of saying things that stay with people. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that mattered most. Was it because of me? This time the silence lasted longer. When he finally answered, there was no hesitation. Partly. I closed my eyes. Damien, you taught me something. His voice remained calm. Honest. I spent years believing success meant acquiring more. More influence. More opportunities. More victories. Then I met someone who measured success differently. Emotion rose unexpectedly in my chest. You cannot change your life because of me. I am not. He paused. I am changing it because I finally understand what kind of life I want. The words settled over me like sunlight after a storm. Suddenly the distance I had fought so hard to maintain no longer felt protective. It felt lonely. Emily, he asked gently. Yes. Would you be willing to see me tomorrow? I smiled despite the tears threatening to form. I think I would. For the first time in weeks, hope returned. And as I stood there watching the lights of Brooklyn glow against the evening sky, I realized that sometimes the bravest choice is not walking away from someone. Sometimes it is finding the courage to walk back. The next afternoon, I arrived at the community garden where we had once stood watching the sunset disappear behind Brooklyn rooftops. Spring had quietly settled over the city. Flowers bloomed between the brick buildings. Children laughed somewhere down the block. The air smelled faintly of fresh soil and rain. For the first time in weeks, my heart felt lighter. Damien was already there when I arrived. He stood beside the garden gate with his hands in his coat pockets, looking strangely nervous. It was an expression I had never seen on him before. Powerful men were not supposed to look uncertain, yet somehow it made him seem more real than ever. When he saw me, his entire expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Relief softened his eyes. Warmth replaced tension. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I crossed the distance between us. Hello, Damien. His smile appeared slowly. Hello, Emily. We began walking through the garden paths without any destination in mind. Sunlight filtered through the trees above us. Around us, life continued as normal. People talked. Dogs barked. Traffic moved through distant streets. Yet everything felt quieter somehow. More focused. You look happy, he said. I am. Good. I glanced toward him. You look different. A faint laugh escaped him. That sounds concerning. It is not. I shook my head. You just seem lighter. His gaze drifted across the garden. Maybe I am. We stopped beside a small bench surrounded by flowers. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Damien turned toward me fully. There is something I need to tell you. My pulse quickened. Okay. He took a slow breath. Before I met you, I thought success was measured by what I could build. His voice remained steady, honest. The companies, the investments, the influence. His eyes met mine. You showed me another way to measure a life. Emotion tightened my throat. Damien, he shook his head gently. Let me finish. I smiled despite myself. Some things never changed. Fair enough. His expression softened. You never cared about what I owned. You cared about who I was when nobody was watching. The words settled between us. Quiet. Powerful. True. That changed me. For a moment I could not speak. I thought about the gala, the library, the rainstorm, the difficult conversations, every step that had brought us here. Finally, I reached for his hand. You changed too. His fingers closed around mine instantly. Familiar. Certain. Home. The city seemed to disappear around us. Not because it was gone, because it no longer mattered. The distance that had once felt impossible had gradually been replaced by something stronger. Understanding. Respect. Choice. I spent so much time worrying about whether I belonged in your world, I admitted softly. Damien stepped closer. And what do you think now? I smiled through unexpected tears. I think I never needed your world. His expression warmed. No. I shook my head. I only needed you. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he lifted my hand and pressed it gently between both of his. No audience. No grand gesture. Just two people choosing each other. The simplicity of the moment made it perfect. As the afternoon sun painted everything gold, I finally understood something important. The barriers that separate people are rarely built from money, status, or opportunity. They are built from fear. Fear of not belonging. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of taking a chance on something real. And sometimes all it takes to cross that distance is finding someone willing to meet you halfway. Damien once had the power to influence an entire city. But the thing that mattered most was not what he could control. It was what he learned to value. And standing beside him beneath the warm Brooklyn sky, I realized that the greatest changes in life rarely arrive through power. They arrive through people.